Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Health, Environment and Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I will quickly run through the evacuation procedures. We have a few people in the building tonight not au fait with it. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs, do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside the Virgin Money building, formerly known as the Yorkshire Bank, on the opposite side of the road. If we can all exit by the doors which we entered the room, or by the fire exits which are clearly indicated in the standard green fire exit signs. If anybody should require assistance evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff who will help you leave the building. And can I also remind everybody the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and will be available to view later on the Council's website. Can I please ask everybody to turn off their mobile phones or to put them on silent for the duration of the meeting? Are you aware of any other apologies other than those from Councillor Sargent, who is being substituted by Councillor Condical? Yeah. Moving forward to item number 3, has everybody had a chance to have a read through the minutes? And is everybody okay for me to sign those minutes as an accurate review of last meeting? Yep. Item number 4, does anybody have any interest that they wish to declare that are not already on the agenda? Councillor Condical.
Thank you, Chair. Because I'm not normally on this committee, they're the same ones as declared for council meetings and they're already listed. Thank you.
No problems. Do we have anybody for public consultation? Right. Moving forward then to item number 6. Questions to the Cabinet Member in attendance. Does anybody have any questions for the Cabinet Member here? Councillor Condical.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the Cabinet Member for Health and obviously other things about the COVID situation in terms of the vaccination and testing? Because I know I had my jab at the URC over there, and I know that's being used sometimes for vaccination and sometimes for testing and things. But obviously things are being upscaled quite considerably, so it'd be useful to have a COVID update just to say if we're ready to go with the extra stuff, or if there's anything the Cabinet Member knows about where we're going or what we need to do, because obviously the COVID situation is potentially getting considerably worse. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kondarker. Yes, unfortunately it is getting worse. I was at a meeting yesterday on a COVID-19 board, and unfortunately, like you say, we in North Warwickshire and Nuneaton and Bedworth, we have dropped a little bit. We're not in the top as we were before. All sites are ready to go again with the vaccination. At the Civic Hall, we are putting a sign out you can have a walk-in, and I believe at Nuneaton it's the same. I have spoken with the hospital on Friday, and they are at the George Eliot, and they are ready in case we do have a surge.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously to Councillor Guttridge. As a Cabinet Member had said in this meeting, that we will only be paying Glendale's on the results. Can I ask how much the savings are currently?
I do not have that to hand at the present time, but I will ask an officer to answer your question and send you an answer. Thank you.
Councillor Shepherd.
I do have a couple more. Obviously Glendale are here tonight, but I did need to make you aware that actually Wenbrook Meadow has not been cut and is usually cut in August, so I've got real concerns of the loss of the wildflower meadow there, which needs cutting every year. Obviously, the Red Deep bus surveys have still not been done, but I'm not surprised. And in regard to the comments from Councillor Condacourt in terms of COVID, in terms of advice to members and wearing masks in this building and this chamber, I am surprised there's a number of councillors who aren't wearing masks. So could I ask what advice they've been given as well?
Thank you for your questions. Concerning the mask wearing, we are waiting for further details, which I did have a chat with Victoria before the meeting, and she is waiting for confirmation of what we will do and what we are. Bearing in mind tomorrow night is full council, we will be advised from before that, hopefully. Going on to your other points, with the Red Deeps, I believe that has been cut. I did go and have a look at it, and you did pull me up last time with a lot of rubbish, and I believe that has been sorted. I went and had a look. On behalf of the Meadows, we have a problem at the moment. We are a little bit behind on the cut and remove, but we will be catching up subject to weather conditions. Unfortunately, the ground care job is subject to weather. If it rains, we can't do. At the present time, we're having a job not to catch up with cutting hedges because of we had snow the other day, and we don't want to go on the ground when it's wet and make ruts. Thank you.
Councillor Shepherd.
In regard to your comments about Wenbrook Meadow, it should have been cut in August. We're in November now, so how could it have been missed for 3 months? That seems an awful long time, and actually the weather in August was rather pleasant, if I remember rightly.
As you can understand, we did get behind this year, and we will look at the Meadows. I will ask officers to have a look tomorrow.
Councillor Condacourt.
I was hoping the Housing Cabinet member would be here. Can we ask a question to be answered, written reply, if that helps?
Councillor Guttridge.
Would Mr. Condarker, Councillor Condarker, like to ask the question, and then we can see what happens?
Councillor Condacourt.
Yeah, I thought it was probably for the Housing Cabinet member because the mobile home sites seem to be making less money now. So I wanted to ask the Cabinet member if we had increased level of void there or increased maintenance costs to explain that increased loss on the mobile home sites. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Guttridge.
Thank you, Councillor Condarker. If you would like to email the housing portfolio holder, I'm sure she will respond with the details that you require.
Any more questions? Right. Moving forward then to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the monitoring of the grounds maintenance contract. I'll hand over to David Truslove, who will go through the report with us.
Thank you, Chair. COVID-19 has obviously continued to impact on service delivery and grounds maintenance this year. We've had to continue with changes in working practices, which remain challenging, as we continue to obviously deliver services, including in our cemeteries, and our grounds maintenance team remain available, should necessary, to be redeployed to other areas if necessary. Since we last reported to this panel in March, there have been, it's fair to say, operational difficulties during late spring and early summer this year, where expected standards were not met, particularly regarding grass cutting and vegetation maintenance. This year's warm wet weather pattern has impacted grass growth, as illustrated in the graph on page 2 of the report. You can quite clearly see there that there was a particular spike in growth during the June period. Officers have worked with the grounds maintenance contractor to address these issues relating to standards of service delivery, and a total of 5 rectification notices were issued to the contractor, reflecting a change in emphasis from individual sites and cases to a more strategic approach, whereby contractors' management systems and processes are being monitored. These notices related to operational frequencies and the failure to schedule works to comply with the frequency schedules, amendments that were required to the Glendale local website, that allows local residents obviously to be able to check what operations are likely to be undertaken in their immediate vicinity. Shrub bed maintenance, path edge maintenance and grass edges and obstacles. What we experienced on a number of our sites was we were able to see that the vast majority of the grass was cut on a site, but that obstacles such as fences, wall lines, litter bins, etc. Were not followed up, and we took that up with the contractor. Additional resources, including staffing and plant, were deployed. My colleague will elaborate on that shortly when they deliver their report. And that brings us on to the monitoring and performance. And you can see from section 5 through to section 6 that it picks up on the fact that we did drop below standard on formal sites and informal sites as well. We have been looking at the informal site scoring, which is typically based on only a small number of operations, and I'll be working with one of my colleagues in the new year to look at how we can address that and bring it back up to standard. Section 6 deals with a summary of the inquiries that came through to the Parks and Green Space team and our contractors. I've put that in both a table and then in a graph, and you can quite clearly see obviously there was a huge surge in inquiries relating to grass cutting and shrub bed maintenance. In June alone we had 771 inquiries. Sorting that by team, you can see that for the 6-month period, April to October, Glendale received a total of 1,313 inquiries through our firm step system, and the Parks team themselves received 951. In total, there have been over 2,600 inquiries this year to date relating to grounds maintenance matters. That compares with the service areas that you can see between 2020 and 2021. Table 6.4 gives some details about what they related to. So you can see grass, hedges and shrub bed vegetation seem to feature quite heavily, but we've also had issues relating to litter, which continues to play out. We're seeing considerably more people using our green parks and green spaces, in part due to the pandemic itself. We're seeing a lot more people staying local and using their parks. Sometimes they don't take their litter home with them, unfortunately. So we're having to address that with extra teams. And finally, ward by month just gives a flavour for where we've been seeing issues and the numbers that have been coming through on a month-by-month basis in wards. We are looking to use this data to drill down into it and try and understand where these issues are presenting, whether it be a housing site or a park or an open space, and whether there is a ward bias to that, so that we can also work with our grounds maintenance contractor in terms of how we address that. Is it an issue with a team, or is it an issue with a particular means of access? Happy to answer questions about that shortly, but if I may, I'll hand over to my colleague Mike Brunskill, who's the Managing Director North of Glendale.
Thank you. Good evening. Apologies, I have a cold. I have been tested. It's not COVID, but if you can't hear me, then please let me know. A short presentation, if I may, to summarise both our experiences and our performance this year, and also, perhaps most importantly, to understand the learning experiences from this year and outline the preparations and initiatives that we have and are putting in place for next year. As Dave has said, COVID-19 has had an unpredicted ongoing impact this year, and in fact, from our perspective in terms of the service delivery, has been more disruptive than last year in respect of staff absences and the knock-on impact of that. We do acknowledge the continued support from Nuneaton and Bedworth Council, which is very much appreciated, the collaborative working in order to minimise the impact wherever possible. And internally within Glendale, we have very robust procedures in place, monitored closely to ensure compliance with matters such as COVID bubbles and appropriate process for staff to follow nationally. What's less obvious are some of the indirect effects of COVID-19, particularly on the macro scale, the global supply chain problems, which I will outline later, have had a significant effect on downtime relating particularly to spare parts for machines and some of our supply partners being overloaded with work. A very quick overview of health and safety. I'm pleased to report that we've had a strong performance in respect of our health and safety during this year. We've had no reportable accidents, which is the same as last year and meets our target of 0. We've had no minor accidents this year, which is a positive outcome, and by comparison we had an equivalent of 8 last year. 9 safety observations. Last year we had 17. Safety observations are something we encourage and is a positive feedback that we receive from staff. We provide training accordingly. Disappointingly, we've had less than last year, and safety observations are a precursor to identifying challenges where we can prevent accidents. So that's something that will be picked up by David, my colleague, the General Manager, in terms of further training with staff in advance of next year's season. And to maintain our ability to respond to general requirements and potential COVID-related requirements, we've had staff undertake COTS refresher training, which is the ability to operate equipment and due process within the cemeteries, and we've maintained a high level of resilience in terms of being able to respond to needs as they arise. Most importantly, to look at performance for 2021, and it's very important from my personal perspective and Glendale as an organisation that we give a full and frank explanation of our view. There's no intention to brush over some of the challenges we faced, some of which could be categorised as macro and external, and some of which are internal, and I'll go through those in turn. We're not relying on this as a reason for any acceptability of performance challenges this year, but it has been, as I'll illustrate in a moment, a very challenging growing season. Unfortunately, we've then had some other factors which have exacerbated the challenges presented by that alone, which in itself is significant. We've had complete management change within the local office here in the Nuneaton Bedworth area. We recognise this particular part of the country as having recruitment and retention challenges which we've experienced before, and to an unprecedented level this year. I'll outline some numbers on that in a moment. Coupled with higher levels of sickness absence, some of which is COVID related and some that isn't. We operate, as was our commitment in our bid to continue providing the service here, to utilise battery-powered equipment wherever possible. And in a more challenging season, we've found that some of that equipment has been wanting in terms of its performance, which we are in the process of addressing. And then finally, as I've alluded to previously, there have been supply chain delays, which means it's taken longer than we would have liked to undertake certain equipment repairs and replacement of some of the equipment that we naturally cycle through during the season. To pick up on the first point there, in terms of, this is the same graph that you've just seen, there was a significant growth peak in June following a rather wet May, and then the sun turned itself on for a sustained period, which resulted in the significant peak in the orange line, this year's grass growth data. which if you compare with the blue line is a 5-year average. The green line was last year. So last year was particularly during the peak we've had this year, last year was particularly kind to us. And the later peak last year didn't have the same impact that an earlier peak does in terms of grass growth. And that causes some significant challenges to the grass cutting programme from June through really to August. It's our objective generally to gear up in terms of resources, both people and equipment, to deal with long-term averages. And it's something we're discussing internally around the fact that with increased extreme climate events or unusual patterns of climate, that we need to address this and look to increase our resilience in the event of future challenging seasons that are increasingly likely to occur. So in many respects, it's no surprise to note that the Firm Step CRM data shows a corresponding peak during the point of maximum vegetation growth and the impact of that, which breaks down, as has been outlined by Dave, into approximately a third of those inquiries, those total inquiries this year, are related to grass, about almost a third to hedges. So it's predominantly relating to the vegetation growth. The other two significant or less significant ones that are noticeable on the chart are around bin and litter related inquiries and fly tipping and graffiti. This just looks at the data in a slightly different way to say how does that break down by different type of inquiry during each month, and the orange element of each bar is the grass growth, with the light green being hedges. So again, it correlates with the growing season, and what you see there is that to some extent, as the issues with grass growth reduced, as we got the grass under control and the growth rate declined, it's normal during the cycle of the season that we move on to hedges and shrubs with the sort of primary maintenance visits following the grass, and naturally the number of inquiries increased during that time because we were to some degree delayed in moving on to that from dealing with the grass cutting operations. Just for some context, we've completed over 135,000 schedules so far this year, and a schedule is a place to go and a task to undertake at a specific or on a certain date, on or around a certain date. And we've taken through our Glendale Live system more than 41,000 photos this year, which is about a 6-fold increase on last year. So that's a positive in terms of us capturing both issues that we identify and images of the work undertaken. And outside of the scope of Firm Step, we also encourage our staff to capture issues that they see when they are undertaking the work in and around the borough. And they've captured over 1,000 issues within Glendale Live, and the images there depict just some of the common themes around litter bins, fly tipping and waterlogging during periods of heavy rainfall, which prevents us from undertaking some of the activities temporarily. As I mentioned briefly before, unfortunately this year we've had both a manager, assistant manager, 2 supervisors and an administrator leave, which is unprecedented. I've not had to deal personally with that level of managerial change in any one year, and that did present, on top of other issues, a significant problem. Fortunately, we managed to backfill those positions within what I would consider to be a relatively short time, sort of less than 2 months, and we had some support from outside. I spent more time here, and as did colleagues providing support during that period of transition, but that nevertheless has had unfortunately some kind of impact, but we have resolved that now, and a strong team are in place going forward into next season. To illustrate or quantify the challenges around recruitment and then retention of staff, we plan for an average, it's not an exact number, it fluctuates in the peak season, for an additional 13 staff during this year, on top of our full-time core staff. And we actually had an average across a season of 3, so substantially under what we anticipated we would require, and that would be in what we would plan for as a normal growing season, with some degree of comfort in those numbers, so well under that. We did backfill with agency staff, but despite them being specialists in sourcing and placing staff for companies such as ourselves, they were unable to supply the full requirement to backfill. So we have consistently suffered with under-resourcing of generally between 2 to 4 staff on and off through the season. Sickness absence has been much higher than we would have like, and than we mandate really within the business. Our target typically is 3% or less, and we've been running at somewhere between 10 and 12%, some of which is COVID related, but some of which isn't, and I'll refer in a moment as to what we're doing about that and other matters. I've referred to the problems with battery powered equipment, and as a result, with the sanction of the council, we purchased additional petrol powered equipment mid-season to have to provide us with some immediate resolution of that problem in the short term. And then in any season, but on top of the other factors I've outlined, the vegetation growth causes increased stress on equipment, which therefore increases downtime due to either small scale or large scale breakdowns, which then with the supply chain problems meant we were waiting longer than we wanted for parts for service, particularly where they were coming from overseas, which in the case of some of our equipment is an unfortunate necessity. As I said earlier, importantly, what we feel is that we need to be honest, understand the learning experiences from this year, which have been significantly greater than last year and the year before, and then understand what it is we can do in advance of the next season to be able to address some of those challenges that I've talked through. Fundamentally, we're undertaking, under the new management team we have in place, a workforce restructure. In part, that's to address and set out clear expectations for our staff, to look at training needs and requirements in advance of the season starting so that we're fully prepared. A key part of that will be appointing some new team leaders. They're some of the key people on the ground that help drive the productivity safely and deliver the quality standards. And that process has already started. As part of the workforce restructure, we're going to be increasing working hours in the summer to provide ourselves with more capacity during the peak period, what we generally term as an annualised hours arrangement. And we'll also be looking to increase the number of 5/7 staff. So those are staff that are recruited on a 5/7 rota that includes weekend working. We're currently sourcing supply partners, but they will go through our rigorous vetting process before they're accepted onto our system, in order to provide a little bit of capacity for those peak periods that can't be planned for and that come about at short notice. And we're also trying to tackle the recruitment challenge through some more innovative recruitment techniques, utilising social media more, less traditional methods of recruiting or to complement those, and seeking to recruit targeted groups, for example, students during the summer period, which we did have some success with this year, and we'll review our processes that support all that. Ultimately, that's about, this is all about increasing the resilience. It's about a reset and then an increase in resilience of our service so that we can cope with some of the peaks and troughs even when they may be out of the ordinary. Replacement equipment, we're looking to invest somewhere around £80,000 on top of the 300,000 or so we invested 2 years ago to replace some of the equipment based on experience, and to look to try and find some different and innovative ways of delivering the service in part. And in particular, we work with one of our major suppliers, Husqvarna, to feed back to them some of our issues. And as a large customer of Husqvarna, we're able to talk directly to them, and it has some impact in terms of their redesign of equipment to improve its performance and reliability. Staff training over the winter period is normal and mandatory, and we'll place specific emphasis on some of the findings from this year. And then lastly, we are considering, as we have elsewhere within the business, opportunities to automate. If we can reduce the need for as many seasonal staff intake as we would normally have, which is where a lot of our challenges are around recruitment and retention, if we can reduce some of that requirement through increasing automation, it's an investment that we are prepared to make as part of the sustained contract going forward. And we've had experience of that elsewhere that's proved successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I open this up to questioning from members, can I just say that the officers and the representatives of Glendale tonight are here to answer questions specifically based around the information that is in this report. If anybody has any other specific inquiries, can we go through the customer service system and CC and Councillor Guttridge, who will come back and respond and chase it up. So, do we have any questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a bit like deja vu all over again. First of all, I'd like to congratulate David Truslove and your people on the hard work that I know that you've put in throughout this year, dealing with the number of challenges that we've had, the number of rectifications we've had to deal with. But, I mean, I remember sitting here in this chamber and committee room 4 years ago, and we'd had a difficult spring. We had recruitment challenge problems, we had equipment challenges, and well, you know, here we are again. It's almost like we haven't learnt. But so my question to the Glendale gentleman here really, a couple of questions really, is now that we've going through this restructure, are you confident that you have the right management structure in place to actually deliver the contract and the service the residents expect? Because I remember when this contract came in, we were promised it was going to be much better than the one we'd had before, and that Glendale Live, Glendale Local was going to be all singing and all dancing and allow residents to be able to track what was happening. It hasn't really delivered what residents expect. So I'm asking, do you now believe have you got the right management structure, and do you have the right practices in place to recruit the people you need to do the work? Because spring will always be wet, grass will always grow rapidly when it's hot and wet, and bushes will always need to be cut back, you know, in the autumn. I mean, that whatever the spikes and peaks and troughs could happen, whenever they happen, that's a given. You know, it grows all year round.
If I understand correctly, the 2 points to the question. The first is, do I and do we as a company have confidence in our management team to deliver the service and learn that from the experiences we've had? Yes, absolutely. David, my colleague, who's been appointed to replace the previous manager, has over 20 years, possibly pushing 30 years experience, and has worked for Glendale for a number of years, as well as other service providers in the industry, and has actually come back to the company after a period with another provider. So yes, I do have confidence in the team. I acknowledge your comments, and you're absolutely right, grass does always grow, and we are well aware of that. It's a dynamic environment. No 2 years are exactly the same. You know, you refer 4 years ago, I do recall that we had some similar challenges that we've had. You know, we've had two pretty good years in terms of it. I'm not going to say the service has been perfect by any stretch, and we always aspire to improve. But yes, absolutely, you know, the thrust of the presentation is not to say there are factors outside of our control that cause us problems. I'm very clearly saying that we recognise that the challenges we face aren't going to go away. Seasons vary, they could be easier or more difficult, and we need to build our resilience to deal with the seasons that increasingly, it seems, are more challenging over a 10-year horizon than might have been the case 15 or 20 years ago. That's an ongoing process, but we've clearly identified, and I am drawing on experience from elsewhere within the organisation, so that, you know, the sharing of best practice and ideas and innovation is not unique to one place. And we have industry forum where we also share with some of our competitors. So I don't think particularly that recruitment and retention is going to be easily resolved, but we have measures to do it differently that have had some verifiable success elsewhere, and I'm also drawing upon our internal HR management team to provide some close support to the contract. In fact, we started that process last week, and we have every confidence that the measures we put in place are the right ones to address the challenges we've faced this year.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. Just come back through you on this. So, what specifically then are you going to do that's going to be different? You've told us that you intend to make changes, but what specifically are you going to do that's different?
As I outlined in the presentation, a lot of these, a lot of the measures we're going to put in place revolve around the workforce. So we've identified some patterns of work and patterns of behaviour that we seek to improve, and with the new management team in place, we're going to be robustly reviewing performance on an individual level, every member of staff, setting out expectations based on experience of where it hasn't been as good as we would like, and to be frank, reducing sickness absence levels through robust management of that, which is a tried and tested practice that has not been as robustly managed as I would have liked this year, which, coupled with the other challenges, just made the whole situation that much more problematic. So annualised hours is something that's new, so that will give us greater capacity with the same number of people in the summer that we would otherwise have. And then some supply chain partners to provide us with a little bit of capacity when unforeseen conditions arise. So, for example, when grass growth spikes, and it does spike at different times of the year, if you were to sit and calculate it semi-scientifically, you would roughly need about a third more people and machines than you would otherwise need. That's on top of the increase we already, the intake we already have each spring. That's not necessarily realistic to achieve in and of itself. The time it takes to recruit people and train them and put them in place, the grass spike will have finished, and the challenges still remain of catching up. So to have some supply chain partners in place that can provide us with some immediate increased capacity is another measure. And then to look to, I'm not going to suggest that I can or we can solve the global supply chain problems, but we're already working ahead in terms of liaising with some of our suppliers to put early orders in for vehicles and for equipment, and we're going from a minimal stock level of what we can expect to need in terms of replacement parts to increasing those stock levels so that we can sustain the longer supply time for when we do utilise those parts and immediately reorder them. So we're just carrying a little bit more stock in terms of those key items. And then finally, is a more sort of ambitious objective is to look at some of the automation. So we're already evaluating sites where we may be able to put in automowers, which are environmentally sustainable, and also reduces the need for additional staff. So if we can reduce our staffing intake from an average of 13 to an average of 9 or 10 or 8 through increased automation and more innovative approaches, that's 4 or 5 or 6 less HR circumstances to manage. So a combination of all those, which is based on experience here in Nuneaton and Bedworth and elsewhere within the business.
Councillor Harbison.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to make a positive point. I've dealt quite a lot with Glendale since becoming a councillor, various officers. I've got to say that you've been fantastic. All of my requests have been met with positivity. Everything's been sorted. I can't complain about anything, apart from a couple of specific ones that I could. But I would imagine that's down to other issues. One of which is up at Hilltop, there's been some problems with some little corners that have been left in various bits and bobs. I've kind of smoothed that over with people and just said, look, you know, from having done that kind of work, it's difficult, especially when you're on a time limit, etc. And sometimes you do have safety issues regarding these things. And I know that we've spoken about this. Fly tipping, brilliant. It's been cleared within 24 hours, every single one that I've reported. So thank you for that. And as I say, every officer has been exemplary, fantastic. You may or may not remember, David, that I spoke to you about a gentleman who wanted to take more active participation in complex foliage management, i.e. wanted to get stuck in themselves. And I don't know if that gentleman got back to you or not. You have a lot, I know. But I'm going to try and track him back down again. First of all, would that be something that would be possible in terms of if it could be encouraged, would be able to get residents more involved with it? Obviously not getting them to do your work for you, but what I mean is actually just get a bit more involved. Because I know that quite a few people do feel a sense of frustration when they see something and they can't just go and tackle it, because they can't just go and tackle it for various reasons that we're going to. And is Glendale gritting? Can I just ask? Gritting, is it Glendale? But you can answer that in a second. But just to ask to Councillor Brown's question, do you believe now, with all the trials and tribulations and traumas that we've been through, do you think we're out of the other side now? Do you think we can now move on, start planning for next year? Everything's good, everyone's happy. That's it, really. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
In no particular order, with regard to the questions you've raised, and thank you for your comments. Yes, we are confident. I can't sit here and give you an absolute cast iron guarantee, and if everybody says they can, then I would be dubious as to their the veracity of that. We continually strive for improvement. We are confident of the measures we've put in place. They're not. They are considered, and have been discussed to the fullest extent that we need, with an open and healthy debate, listening to the feedback from our staff as well. This is not just a management team sitting in an office deciding what's best. We take feedback from our staff directly, and that's often invaluable. So having put that into the mix, the time for discussion's over. This winter period is our opportunity, which we've fully embraced, to put in place those measures that I've outlined, and I'm confident that if we can deliver on the vast majority of those, close to the fullest extent that I've outlined, that will make for a much smoother service, a more resilient service, I think is the point. Growing conditions will be what they will be, and we're going to be ensuring that we can deal with, insofar as is reasonably practical for me to say, some of the more challenging circumstances that we find intermittently, not every year, but that we do find intermittently. And I have every faith in the team around me. There are going to be some challenges around workforce performance and performance management and expectation, but we intend to, put together proposals that we'll go through with our staff individually and collectively that both reward good performance, but also, you know, robustly address performance-related issues where that is within the sort of control of an individual, for example.
Councillor Condicle.
Thank you. First, I'll do positives first. This October's deep cutting back of hedges, 2 metres in some cases, really positive. Because in past years we've continuously having to put in requests to take it back a bit. So can I give a real positive for that, those deep cutbacks, because they will save a lot of service calls next year as they grow out. But there is one issue about those deep cuts. You do need to sort of go along and do a bit of a triage after you've done it, because there is some litter problems and some debris that needs taken away sometimes. So it would be good if there was like an inspection afterwards, because otherwise you get a service call saying there's always litter and in one case there's branches and bits that really need taken away because people will have mischief. But generally the deep cutbacks really welcome. The second question is about the extra housing we've got built over the last few years. That is now working through its 12-month period when the developers have to maintain the sites. But I think by next spring, some of those might start to become Glendale's responsibilities, or it might be some, it depends on the contractors. So have we got capacity, and are we planning for the extra sites, both in terms of workload and even the simple things like litter bins? We're not coping with emptying the bins at the moment with the guys that go round. So if you start having the Davidsons or the Persimmons litter bins on your rounds, are you able to do that? And the final point, which might be more for David, we have a serious problem with the housing sites not being done as well as the general stuff. I think you have started to catch up on a lot of stuff, but a lot of the places like Carisbrook, Wright Avenue, some of the housing sites seem to have not got the catch-up that the other ones have. I know Councillor Golby was talking at one of the cabinet meetings, that the council is looking at how we get those housing sites back up to spec, because there's 3 areas. You've got your nice parks, you've got the general, and then you've got the housing, and it's the housing that seems to have suffered from your staff shortages. And I do like the idea of automatic grass cutting of things, because I think if we had some sheep at Ryde Avenue and Carisbrook, it would actually do a better job than Glendale when you haven't got the staff. So if you have electronic sheep, I assume you're talking for automation of having these things that are solar powered that scoot round and do stuff. Because at the moment, sheep would be a better option than having Glendale who haven't got the staff. Thank you.
Councillor, if I may come back to you with regards to monitoring on housing sites. Obviously, I believe members are aware that the member of our team that usually monitors those areas recently suffered a double bereavement, and obviously we are looking out for them while they work with their family on that. It is the case that the resources that we have available to us means that we have to prioritise where we work, and in housing sites at the moment, obviously, if we have urgent inquiries from our housing colleagues, we look to address those within the existing team so that we can address those inquiries, and we have had some which we've picked up and dealt with. In terms of going forwards, I appreciate that Glendale, we're working with them on their management systems. We are working to address issues around all of our sites. We treat them all the same, whether it's a housing site or an industrial space or our public open spaces or highways areas that we manage on behalf of the county. And in terms of managing the intake of additional open spaces coming forward, that is obviously something that we plan for as those sites come forward. In most cases, I believe the developers are only just beginning their 12-month defects liability period prior to adoption, and obviously we'll ensure that that their sites are to an adoptable standard prior to taking them over, and that we've had sufficient time to brief our contractor so that they can make appropriate arrangements.
Yeah, just picking up on that particular point, Councillor. We absolutely can cope with additional sites coming on stream as part of the contract. We work closely with your council officers, and if we have the visibility of data and information in sufficient time, which I fully expect we will have as part of our routine communication, then we simply build that. It's quite a straightforward calculation, and build it into our capacity of overall people and equipment, and then we program it within the Glendale Life system so that it's optimised within our routing. And duly noted with regard to additional litter bins, etc. The system we utilise does take account of the travel time, the relationship between those new sites and the existing sites, and it's something that's entirely normal within our business, that the sites come in and drop off depending on circumstances.
Councillor Condicle.
Yeah, can I come back on the we treat all sites the same issue, because the people in the housing sites are actually paying explicit service charges to have the grass cut outside their flats. Yeah, there might be £10 a week or whatever it is, but over a year that's several £100 they're paying to get the grass cut outside the flats. If that's not happening, they should be getting a refund. Some of them are actually mowing their own grass even though they're paying for it to be mowed. So I do think the housing sites deserve either to get a refund or to actually get the service they're paying for. It's an issue. I know in the last year's accounts there was something like £180,000 of underspend on grounds maintenance. I think a lot of it was housing. So it's where that underspend goes. And I think if the housing sites aren't getting it, the tenants should be getting a refund.
Just to come back on that point, in terms of service charges to tenants, I know that the figures that they usually quote to us relate to their service charges across the services that they provide, and that includes obviously cleansing of communal areas, window cleaning and such like. I have actually just this afternoon been dealing with an inquiry from a housing tenant who's making a similar point to yourself. What we're establishing is actually what percentage of their service charges actually relates to grounds maintenance, and in many instances it is significantly less than that. Notwithstanding that, clearly if they're paying for a service they would expect to receive it, and I know from working with colleagues in housing, in instances where that service has not been fully delivered, we have in the past discussed and in some cases made appropriate adjustments.
Councillor Cooper.
Yes, my question is, does anybody actually go around and inspect the work after it's been done? Because from my experience, which is only a short experience, I think a lot of your workers would make probably better butchers, to be quite honest, because a lot of the work is a mess, a total mess.
Yeah, we do, and so the process within what the service we deliver is for staff to take before and after photos. So that gives us an immediate, and that data is available to us pretty much straight away. However, we also undertake site inspections by the two supervisors particularly that report to David, and that's in addition to the inspections and monitoring that's undertaken by the council officers. So I acknowledge your point that you're raising, that some sites may not be delivered to the standard you would expect on completion of the work, and that's something that I will note and we will put focus into to understand why that may be the case. But do we undertake self-inspection and quality monitoring of our own work? Yes. But we don't undertake inspection or monitoring of every single site on every single piece of work. It's simply impractical to do that, but we look to monitor a representative sample, but clearly if there's issues you raise, that we're happy to look into those.
Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that other members have raised the issues within the housing complexes this year. It's been the worst I've ever known in terms of how long the grass has been left, how often the residents are contacting me to say there's been an issue this year. So I hope that will be addressed moving forward. I think it is a real issue, and residents expect when they have little grassed areas for it actually to look rather pleasant than in some cases in Dillon and Lexington was rather higher than it should be. In terms of the stats that you've supplied us with, in terms of the formal areas, I mean, 2 out of 7 are red, only 1 is green, and I have doubts on the other being green because actually there'll be, although there's 70, in some cases 75 and 73%, they're actually under or 80%, so I would have suggested they needed to be either amber or red. Informal areas, every single one, red, hasn't met specification, hasn't been able to. This year has been the worst year. I've sat here many times, yes, 4 years ago, yes, the same sort of issues, yes, we've got staffing issues, equipment issues, and I think there comes a time that you have to say, well, I'm sorry, they're your issues and not this Borough Council's. What we expect is delivery of the service for the contract we've given you. And I think at this present moment, it's not looking great. I hope that you can get yourselves back on track. But the amount of complaints I have had to deal with in regard to Glendale this year has been enormous. And I think, you know, that's not fair on the residents who expect their areas to look nice, expect there to be some quality and standard. You know, the number of times verges have been cut and all the edges left, and oh, they're going back to strip, but actually they never do. You know, it just doesn't send out the right appearance. We get a lot of visitors to this town being associated with George Eliot, and actually when the standards are down, it sends a bad impression to the visitors that we're expecting to come into our town.
Yep, thank you. Certainly take your comments on board. If I could just say one thing in reference to your comment that I hoped we'd made clear that I'm certainly not suggesting that the issues that are presented have been anything other than our issues. Some of them have been things that are within our control, and we're going to work very hard to address those, and are confident we will do. Some of them have been factors outside of our control, but they're still ours to resolve. So I would just like to emphasise that I'm not, certainly not suggesting that there are matters outside of our control that we can't or won't do anything about.
Councillor Shepherd.
Chair, if I can just come back, I did have a couple for David. In terms of the cemetery data, is that going to come to the committee? And in terms of the tree works, the same? Because obviously they're not within this report. So I don't know how the tree people who have taken on the tree works are performing. In terms of the cemeteries, you know, we had big issues. So I don't know whether they've been resolved. So that's coming to this committee as well.
Thank you, Councillor. In relation to cemeteries, what we're referencing there is inquiries that related to cemetery matters. They used to come through directly to the Parks team because the cemeteries officer used to report directly to my post. Obviously, with the restructure that came into being last year, the cemetery officer now reports to the business manager. And so inquiries relating to cemeteries that are not grounds maintenance related will go to the cemeteries office, and that typically is relating to inquiries from families in relation to headstones or burial arrangements. And I was just wanting to make that point clear to people that they're not included within this data. Obviously, if they do receive inquiries that are grounds maintenance related, they refer them to ourselves, and we capture those. They are moved within the firm step system so that it comes back to us, so they would be reflected in the parks data. I'm sorry, could you remind me of your second question? Trees. It was with trees. The tree contract obviously has been let separately, and this report is relating to grounds maintenance. It is a matter for this panel if they wish to have a report on our tree contract, and certainly we could make arrangements to provide one.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions for David really here. To what extent do you think that the request to members and the public to record all complaints, if you like, about grounds maintenance through the Council's customer services team has actually given us the data to get a true picture of what's going on? And I noticed we mentioned number of rectifications. Was it 6? 5. How does that compare with previous years?
Certainly in terms of recording inquiries through the firm step system, that is proving to be very beneficial. For the first time, we're able to get a clear picture of volumes. We're starting to analyse that data. We're trying to look at it in terms of trends that we can identify, whether it is particular issues with a particular service area, whether it would be with housing. I know that this year we've had difficulties on some of our housing sites, particularly where we have areas within the complex that require different types of machinery. So where the external perimeter of the site we can cut with traditional ride-on type equipment, there will be areas within the site that requires pedestrian machinery, and there have been issues where that's not occurred. And we've been looking at that, and I know David, my colleague, has been visiting some of those sites, and in some cases it's down to team members, and that's a matter for Glendale, and they're addressing with those teams to make sure that that is addressed. In other cases, it's been about access, and that's where some of the Glendale Live data that we get back allows us to better manage that. So we have instances where we've been unable to access a site because it's obstructed either by vehicles or gates which are locked. Not in all cases, but in some. And it's allowing them to record that. So if we have a particular issue on a particular site where we've several occasions we've attempted to access and we cannot, that gives us data we can then take to our colleagues in housing and ask them to address it either with the warden or with tenants to ensure that access is arranged. Sorry, your second point.
Yeah, it was just that we mentioned the number of rectifications and how it compared with previous years, but what you're telling me seems to think that the changes that have been made more recently have given us some sort of clarity of focus so that we could have a strategy to improve things going forward.
Yes. Previously, the rectification notice system tended to focus on individual sites and particular sets of circumstances. That generated a large number. I think in the past I reported we were in tens of rectification notices. We've changed our approach with the new contract and with the new team that we put in place so that we're looking at it at a more strategic level. Where we are detecting failures in service delivery, we're looking at management systems. And you can see that in the rectification notices that we issued earlier on in the year. We were addressing things like the scheduling system. We were addressing things like the Glendale local system so that the public can see what is going on. And we focused on particular areas where at the time there were issues with shrub beds, grass cutting and obstacle maintenance and such like. What that is attempting to address was an approach that had evolved whereby we would generate a series of sites that needed additional attention. Understandably, the contractor will then seek to address that, usually by diverting resources to address those particular issues, at which point any kind of scheduling system that you may have falls down. And in effect, it becomes self-defeating, because if your schedule goes, you'll just generate more inquiries because you're now missing somewhere else. So we're trying to break that cycle. One is it is a matter for our contractor to manage the delivery of that service at that operational level. What we are doing is concentrating on looking at their management systems, and where we feel that those have weaknesses within them, is asking them to address those, and that was the purpose behind those. And that has seen some immediate benefits, and the data that we're now collecting is allowing us to concentrate that further. And Mike, you wanted to come back in?
Just to elaborate a little bit further in terms of our experience with firm steps, so this is the first year where we've had it really embedded and had the sort of the full experience of it, having worked on it in the previous years. It has been illuminating. It is useful for us to both understand where we are, where the hotspots may be, and whether we need to make a decision to redirect resources, which is something we wouldn't take without due consideration, because it does become a regressive firefighting situation and inefficient to deliver, which then has a knock-on effect further ahead in terms of grass rounds or shrub and hedge maintenance rounds. There is a bit of further work to do, which we've discussed around the categorisation of enquiries that come in. So whilst we're certainly not going to sit here and say that we're comfortable or satisfied or pleased with the number of enquiries, enquiries aren't automatically complaints, and that's one of the things we need to differentiate. Is my grass has not been cut isn't necessarily a complaint. It may be if it was supposed to have been cut at a prior time, and too much time has elapsed to allow for the natural sort of variation that we get in the cutting cycle. But if it's the grass is long, or my grass hasn't been cut, if it's not scheduled to be cut, or it's only just about scheduled to be cut, then that's a request for service or a generalised inquiry, and we need to do some more categorisation work on all the customer inquiries that come in to say what is a genuine complaint, and what is a request for service. So, you know, another example is the year we've had, we're on a set cycle of grass cutting. The grass will be longer between cuts than it would be if it wasn't growing as quickly. So grass long is not necessarily an upheld complaint. However, you know, grass that has missed a cycle for whatever and is well out of specification because it's missed a cut, that would be an upheld complaint. So there's a bit more work to do on the categorisation, but it is progressing well. And I hope next year that we will have some more data to present in terms of drilling down a bit more into the customer contact that we receive through FirmStep.
I just have a question relating to the data in effect. Obviously, as we collate more data and we get it sorted and we move it forward and the data becomes more and more expanse to what we've got, are we going to use this data so that we can do some future planning? So like the lessons that we've learned from this year, are we using the data now so that we can actually plan ahead for next year, so that we don't get to a point in the year where we're looking at all of a sudden we need to employ an extra 10 people with 2 weeks before we're going to start doing the grass cutting? So the data's great and it's wonderful, but is the plan to use this data to do some forward planning? Obviously, there's peaks and troughs around weather that can't be planned for, but we all know traditionally where the grass cutting season will start, roughly, and we know where it will finish. It's unusual this year. I know farmers are taking grass silage in November, which is an unusual year. But it's important that we don't just collect the data and don't use it. I think we need to see it being used and planning from it.
The very short answer to that is yes, of course. The slightly longer one is that it's a theme I've discussed with colleagues within the business a number of times. We live in an age where we're often data rich but information poor, and masses of data is only of any use if you turn it into meaningful information that you can then act upon. And that's really so FirmStep's built up a lot of data. We're now starting to analyse that information and learn from it. But we do we join up the firm step data with our own Glendale Live Work programming system, and from that we make judgments around where we need to plan for resource levels in the following year. But I would say of equal importance to that is then ensuring that our preparation over the winter season is such that we've got, by the time we reach, if you like, the start line of the season, that we've got all our measures in place. That's timely recruitment of the right people, carefully inducted, machines, spares, etc., all lined up, and all that, if you unwind it, is based on the data that you refer to.
Just another point going back to the spares there. I assume that you collate the data around what spares you've brought throughout this year, and I presume you've got a regular sort of like schedule for, we need to change the mower blades on this piece of machinery. So are we using that data from your side to ensure that we're not waiting for a mower blade to come in, or we're not waiting for a strimmer cable to come in, or the bigger parts that may potentially get held up, we're looking forward to getting them ordered or keeping them in stock so that we don't have a piece of machinery down for a couple of weeks when we need it?
Precisely so, that we'll be looking closely at the volume of replacement parts that we've utilised this year and previous years. It's not just based on 1 year, and we'll plan ahead, and we will increase our stock levels, as I said earlier, to take account of what I'm led to believe will be ongoing supply chain challenges through next year, and if you believe the media, into 2023. So yes, we will be taking that into account.
Does anybody have any more questions? Councillor Guttridge.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Chair. I'd like to just come back to Councillor Kandaka's thing. It was my decision to do the hedge cutting, a hard hedge cutting. We need to cut that hedge back because it will pay dividends in the spring. When Glendale go and cut, they'll cut right close, and we should hopefully not have problems down some of the walkways. As I said in my video, it will look a mess, but in the spring it will bush out. We had a dry run down in Maple Park where we cut some laurels, and we did cut them back, and they were sharp, but they have bushed out to be a lovely hedge. A credit to the guys. I also thank the Glendale guy who cuts the hedge. Following on from your bins, the new administration has altered the...
Councillor Shepherd.
I've got real concern that this is an OSP scrutiny year, and we are allowing the cabinet member to come back in. You know, that's not what we do in scrutiny, so I've got real concern that the cabinet member is using it as a political platform, which he's doing there, to address an issue that actually this scrutiny is supposed to be scrutinising, and we are supposed to be scrutinising the executive.
I will allow the point about the hedge trimming. I think it's important that we get it out there why we've done a hard cut this year.
Yeah, I can answer the question on the bins, but obviously the opposition group do not want me to answer the question on the bins.
I'm sure Councillor Condacor would be happy with a written explanation. If we have no other points, then I will thank the officers for coming tonight and thank the representatives from Glendale for coming, and hopefully when they come to the next meeting we'll have some more data to have and analyse over and have a look at and see some improvements. We're just going to swap the agenda around a little bit here, and we're going to actually do item number 9 next, which is the so if we can move forward to item agenda number 9. Unfortunately, Mr. Malik is unable to attend tonight, so we do have Inspector Williams from Warwickshire Police here who's going to talk on the report, and I'm assuming that we've all read the content of the report. Any questions we have for Mr. Malik, if we can put those in writing, and we will get a written response for them. Anything, I did say to Victoria earlier that if anybody had a question, and then when they go from here, if they want to get it in by the end of play on Thursday on the next 2 reports, we will endeavour to get an emailed response. Inspector Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say, certainly from a police perspective, with the COVID pandemic coming out of the lockdown and then restrictions becoming more relaxed, we were always anticipating to see an increase in crime and disorder. But in relation to Q2 performance data that I've had a look at, from our perspective, it was a fairly positive picture, especially around serious acquisitive crime and antisocial behaviour. Clearly, improvements are required around violence against the person, but we are working hard, as we have for some time now, with partners within the realms of domestic abuse, and now more so over the last 2 or 3 years around knife crime, especially those linked to county lines and organised crime groups. In terms of exploitation, whilst those offences have been on the increase, particularly child sexual exploitation, I think it should be noted that those are thankfully, relatively low in number. Sticking with the violence theme, whilst alcohol-related violence has seen a decrease, there is still, again, some work to do around drug-related misuse. And again, we continue to work closely with our partners, not least Change, Grow, Live, CGL as they're known, and Compass. It'll also be noted there's been an increase in hate crime, bit of a mixture really for Nuneaton and Bedworth, particularly around racial, disability, and a little bit around people's sexual orientation. These offences have 2 categories really. They're either recorded as crimes, or they can be recorded as hate incidents, and that's where the element of a substantive offence is not present. So we record those as hate incidents, but equally the victim still receives as good a level of service as we can provide. But interestingly, they're also wide-ranging in their reporting. So to give you some examples of the hate crimes that we're getting, they're either linked to neighbour disputes, to road rage incidents. We have a fair amount of abusive customers shouting at staff who work in shops, pubs, restaurants. Then there's also the element of ASB, where unfortunately we do get a section of youths who will target particular houses, and 9 times out of 10 that's based on potentially the ethnicity of the occupier of the premises. We get a fair amount of complaints from taxi drivers, bus drivers, again from perplexed customers for whatever reason. Graffiti sprayed on walls, and another one we've had a little bit of in Nuneaton and Bedworth, but actually in other areas of the county, and that is stickering. So this is instances where people who are linked to prescribed or arguably banned groups who are, let's say, anti-government or right, left-wing, and etc., will actually go round the town centre or the wider areas and start putting stickers on buildings and traffic lights, etc., trying to get their message across to the local communities. So that's the type of range of reports that we get in relation to hate crime. And something else that we've sort of picked on recently, it's come out of really, it was prevalent within lockdown, but certainly has carried on whilst the lockdown measures have been more and more relaxed. So linked to sort of fraud online crime, but actually falls, whilst a lot of the online crime we get normally goes centrally to action fraud, which is outside the scope of Warwickshire Police per se, because that's a national body that does assessment of online fraud for all forces. And once they're assessed, if they feel that it needs further investigation, it will be put out to that respective force. But actually what we're seeing is is quite a lot of blackmail online. And what we're seeing there is that a victim is going online. They go into a specific website, of which there are many. They then engage in conversation with a male or female, and these male or females can be anywhere in the world, quite frankly. During that conversation, some of them can go on for quite some time, and what they're really doing is they're trying to gain information from that victim. During that conversation, somehow they might well entice them to begin to remove their clothing, and even at times engage in sexual acts. What the victim's not realising, they're thinking they're having a nice, comfortable chat with that other person, but they're actually video recording them. And the next thing that they find is they're then getting blackmailed in terms of the suspect is requesting that the victim pay, if you like, a ransom. And what they haven't realised is that recording then, whilst the offender will have done some quick background checks on the victim, they then tell the victim that if they don't pay this particular fee, and it could be large amounts of money at times, they will then send that recording to that victim's Facebook account, and thereby their friends and family are seeing it. Now, we've had a lot of this, I've got no doubt it's happening a lot across the country, but we've had a lot of these within Warwickshire and within Nuneaton and Bedworth. Sometimes we're getting them every day. We have been putting out crime prevention messages and guidance messages to members of the public through our social media accounts. But that is something in terms of online fraud, which is now becoming blackmail that people need to start considering. So that's just a sort of a quick overview where I think we are in relation to the Q2 performance. Obviously, we're now into sort of the Q3. But let's not forget, we also had the Euros during Q2. I don't think, from my perspective, that had a massive impact on some of the crime stats that we're seeing. I think it's said in the actual analytical report that even in terms of domestic violence, they don't think it had a massive effect. But notwithstanding, it would have had an effect in terms of potential violence linked to alcohol and or drugs. And then just coming a little bit more to run up to Christmas, really, I just wanted to tell the members that my team, from a Safer Neighbours perspective, we've got certainly a 12 days campaign of activity, which will include mini operations in and around Nuneaton and Bedworth. Some of that will also be linked to town centres, because obviously the nature of the crimes that we see this time of year, particularly around town centres. We've also got force operation, cold operation presence. This is something that we do every year, and the main focus of that is to ensure that our resources and our tactical planning is in place, and that really then allows us to have a greater resource, certainly across Nuneaton and Bedworth anyway, to cope with the demands that we'll get around Christmas and New Year. We're also working closely with licensing at the local council here, on CCTV and Pub Watch, because we're also aware of the recent trend, that's national trend. Thankfully, it's not just localised to Warwickshire or just to Nuneaton and Bedworth, but I'm sure members have read about the spiking element of drinks and people that are taking place in bars and clubs and pubs, particularly aimed at women. And unfortunately, some of the offenders, I believe it started in the Nottingham area, and it's become more prevalent since students have returned to university. So we know that a lot of it's happening in the likes across the border in Coventry, where the offenders appear to be getting into licensed premises armed with some kind of object that has a needle on the end of it. I have heard of people are using EpiPens as well. Some of the reports that we've had have been found not to be the case, but actually a lot of the victims have gone to hospital and found that they have been injected or, a syringe potentially has been used to incapacitate them later. So we're alive to that, and we're linking that in with the, we've got a working group now, a partnership working group to tackle the violence against women. And we're also aware of some government funding through the Safer Streets project that certainly our colleagues here at the local council and our community safety colleagues within Warwickshire County Council are working hard to try and get some of that money so we can use it locally in some identified areas, not least the likes of Riversley Park and these larger open spaces where, unfortunately, a lot of these violent crimes against women tend to take place. And that is pretty much it from me. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Councillor Conacle.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the positive note, we've really noticed how good our PCSO is at the moment and how proactive he is. We've had issues with like displaced homeless people from the town centre coming out to Wellington. So there's a lot of good stuff happening, but we're still not getting enough people reporting to you on 101 stuff, particularly like nuisance motorbikes. They think, well, just send a Facebook message to the council. And I keep saying, but it'd be useful if the police did another round on 101. And one of the reasons people weren't ringing 101 is historic problems getting through. And then I faced this myself in the past. Have we actually got on top of that? Because that would be really good to encourage people to say ring 101, and now we've got more people on the switchboards.
Thank you for the very positive comments, Councillor, particularly on, I'm assuming you're talking about PCSO Tom Venus. Very good officer. In terms of 101, my understanding, and it's not my area of business, because obviously I've got community policing, but 101, as you would be aware, is a national system, which probably and arguably needs more money pumping into it, quite frankly. But from a Warwickshire perspective, I think it's fair to say that there's been some challenging resource issues within that department, a bit like the colleagues from Glendale, really, that we've suffered through the COVID. We've also had people leave for other career opportunities. So it's been a bit of a revolving door. That said, senior management within the communication centre have acted quickly, and a lot of positions have been either filled through recruitment or we've had to use backfill from other policing teams. I couldn't sit here and tell you what kind of percentage of those calls are being answered because I wouldn't have that data. By all means, if any members ever require that, we do have a control room manager who would probably know pretty quickly, be able to give you that information via email should you wish to have that. But there are some challenges for Warwickshire Police, not least through IT. Since we started becoming out of the alliance with West Mercia, you can imagine we've almost had to rebuild the force. Now the IT structure is a massive one that doesn't come out with a lot of complications, and obviously we've had to chief officers have had to find the money to do that, and that would have had a knock-on effect on not only our computers but the telephonies as well. So that wouldn't have helped, but my understanding is the performance is as good as it can be right now, and it's fairly good. I tend to get complaints about 101, and then I pass them on to our control room colleagues. But I have to say, in recent times, I haven't had any.
Councillor Conacle.
Yeah, thank you. It is Tom, and please pass on our appreciation for his work. And just one final point, the only sort of antisocial behaviour I've noticed at the moment is when you go out the council house and the town centre some evenings, it's getting quite rowdy, and I think you've had some dispersion orders there. Are they sort of worked through yet? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, you would be right, Councillor. We are aware of some groups that have been causing issues within the town centre. We know one of the magnet points, unfortunately, is the McDonald's restaurant. We are in communication with them, and in fairness to the restaurant, they have put an extra security measures in their store. It hasn't totally got rid of the issue, but it's something we're tackling. There was a group of youths that we were aware of and have identified. They did come from a local area of Nuneaton, but actually they've now left for the Coventry area, I do believe, because working closely with our colleagues in housing and community safety here at the council, we were able to evict them. And I think upon their eviction, they've decided to play their face for a little while in the town centre. We are aware of a group that are causing issues from a local school, which we're also trying to deal with. But I would like to think that on the run-up to Christmas particularly, I will be using my wider resources to concentrate on the town centre and eradicate those types of problems. In terms of the dispersal, I think a lot of people tend to think that it can stay in as long as it wants. It can't. It has to be an inspector authority, so it'd be at my rank at least. There has to be a fair number of incidents reported to give the evidence, and it can only last for 48 hours. So that particular dispersal order that was put in a few weeks ago ran out that weekend and hasn't been put back in place since, because basically the evidence hasn't been there to allow it.
Councillor Harbison.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the museum and the cafe area around the side, it was pointed out at the Neighbourhood Watch last week to Kerry Owens that there was a problem there. It had kind of been noted, but it had not really been actioned upon. I've actually noticed, because I live very close to there and I walk through all the time, I've actually noticed that there seems to be a lot less detritus lying around, and there doesn't seem to actually be any glass. Can I just ask, is this pure coincidence, or is this a result of some actual dedicated action that's happened around the area? Thank you.
It would be down to some action, but it would be wrong of me to sit here and say that some of that hasn't been a bit of luck, lady luck as well. You know, we can't take all the positives for that. However, we are aware of the hotspot areas. We know that Riversley Park is one of them, has been for many a year. And again, it tends to be seasonal. But where we've got localities within the borough that are perhaps quieter, shall we say, at this time of the year, then that's an opportunity for me and my sergeants to move our resources around where the greatest need is. And at this time, it would appear to be, in the main, the town centre and the surrounding areas. So going into Abbey Ward, Wenbrook, et al. So, as I say, on the run-up to Christmas, you know, whilst I would never move my PCSOs from their respective beat areas, there comes a time where I have to move my beat managers, my PCs, basically.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's very difficult to keep in touch with, but what could the police do about this constant weed smoking everywhere? It's rife in Nuneaton, everywhere. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, fair point. It's more and more difficult for us in terms of a stop search, because the rules don't allow us to actually just stop a member of the public anymore just based on smell. So if an individual walked past me while I was walking on the beat and is smoking what appears to maybe be a roll-up cigarette, for example, and as they walk past, I think, that's a smell I recognise, probably cannabis. I then don't have the power, the police officers don't then have the power to go and stop that person and search them. It's just something that, you know, they are the rules. However, what we are aware of and what we have been tackling, and again became more prevalent in lockdown, is the cannabis factories that we've had in and around Bedworth. I have got a bit of a list here, but we have done probably in quarter two, I know we did at least 6 warrants in that 3-month period. where we hit a number of premises, including on the industrial estate, one of the industrial estates in Nuneaton. And it's fair to say we recovered easily in excess of 2,000 to 3,000 plants across those premises. A number of persons were arrested, and I hope it wouldn't come as too much as a surprise, but organised crime is everywhere in terms of drugs and cannabis, and it also links in now to human trafficking and modern slavery. And dare I say this, but the Albanians are very good at this, and quite a few of them that we've recently come across, we can see we've either arrested an Albanian national, or there's clear evidence of Albanian nationals having been there, because passports, etc., have been left behind. And there's very basic mattresses and kitchen utensils and takeaways left in the premises. So they either knew we were coming, or they just didn't happen to be there. But it is organised crime. And, you know, we keep saying they're probably in plain sight. But, you know, smell in open public places is a difficult one for us. It's a lot easier for us to build the intelligence if a particular smell is coming from a particular premises, with usually a heat source.
Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. It is worrying that the domestic abuse figures are going up with the knife crime, but in terms of reoffending, the reoffending rate is higher in this borough than other boroughs, so I'm wondering whether you could give me some information what the issue is. Is it because we've got more hostels in terms of McIntyre House and places like that, so therefore our reoffending rate would be higher? I just don't know.
Thank you, Councillor. If I'm honest, it's a difficult one for me to answer, because whilst we have offender managers within our CID department to get nominated with individuals, especially when they're coming out of prison, a lot of it we do rely on our colleagues from the probation service. And obviously, you'll probably be aware that through lockdown, COVID, a lot of those agencies were not within the workplace, and thereby you had a fair amount of individuals coming out of prison and either no fixed abode or going back to addresses that potentially couldn't be monitored that well. And of course, if they're not being called in to speak with our probation colleagues, then they're just a bit harder to track. That said, from what I know, talking to our proactive CID colleagues, quite a few of our offenders who have come out who are perhaps involved more in acquisitive crime, so your burglary type, vehicle type offences, a lot of them have been rearrested recently and put back where they came from. So yeah, it's difficult to answer, and probably our probation colleagues could answer it better than I could.
Anybody else, any questions? I shall ask one myself then. Just going back to what you spoke about earlier with the hate crime, are we seeing any particular sort of like age range where it's becoming more prevalent, or is it just general across the board?
Thank you, Chair. I did bring a document that I have got somewhere. Bear with me. There is a county-wide sort of hate partnership group that sit quite regularly, out of which we do get analytical products that help us. So I was able to get that just before I came to this meeting, actually. So I'll just go through the pages that I've got here. I've just highlighted some areas, but some of the feedback we're getting from the analysts, particularly for our borough, is that the type of location for Nuneaton and Bedworth, more prevalent, it happens within shops and schools. So that's an interesting one. I'll have to turn a few pages, so bear with me. In terms of identified themes, 73% are usually verbal comments towards victims based on physical attributes. 16% comments made through social media and text messages, and we have tended to find in Nuneaton and Bedworth that is done through malicious communications. You'll get a small percentage that are physical violence, and then you'll probably get a very small 2-3% that is damage to property. Hate crime by relationship, as far as we're aware in Nuneaton, the victim is less likely to know their offender than any other parts of the county. And then a couple of other areas. There are graphs here, but yeah, again, it just says some of the prolonged highly weekly volumes coincided with school holidays and warmer weather. And then in terms of profile, this doesn't just go for Nuneaton and Bedworth, so you'll have to forgive me, but it just gives you a flavour, because it is an average across the county, but 55% of victims are male. Normally male, white, North European, aged 10 to 49, and with females it's white, North European, 20 to 49. And in 2021, 65% victims were white, 15% black, and 19% Asian. 10% of all victims were repeat victims. And in terms of those repeat victims, I think from a partnership perspective, certainly a police one, with our hate crime team that we have in our harm hub, we're trying to give them an enhanced service. So hopefully that gives you some statistics anyway.
I would assume, based on the statistics we've just been given, particularly in schools, it's potentially more pupil to pupil than it is pupil to teacher.
Yes, you'd be correct, yeah.
With the cyber fraud offences as well, is the sharp increase due to people are now reporting it more, or is it that it's just gone up and it's always been reported? Because looking at the figures here, it looks like it's because people have now started to report it more, and is that because it's now becoming more of a serious offence?
From my experience, this has been around for years, but I think knowledge and understanding is improving. Hopefully, in our communities that have probably got the more elderly living in there. However, we've seen an increase in lockdown simply because people weren't going shopping; they're shopping online, and consequently, emails get hacked, accounts get hacked, all the rest of it. Very sophisticated, to be fair, but I think it's been more prevalent because of COVID-19.
And do you see that sort of slowing down, or do you see that continuing now it's become prevalent?
I think, Chair, would be a bit of a guesstimate, but I see it continuing. From what I understand, even though shops are now open and some are thriving, some aren't, online shopping is still, it appears to be the way to go. So I don't see it reducing, if I'm honest.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any further questions? In that case then, can we thank Inspector Williams for turning up tonight and coming to speak before us? And is the committee happy that we note this report? Right, moving forward, we are going to change it around again. We're going to go to item number 10 now, which is the Integrated Performance Report while Steve is here. So I shall hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Steve Gore. I'm the Performance and Risk Management Officer. I coordinate performance and monitor the Strategic Risk Register and produce associated reports. Reports produced for the management team on a monthly basis, cabinet on a quarterly basis, and scrutiny panels also quarterly. In relation to the scrutiny panel, the integrated performance report comprises of 6 pieces of information. Appendix A shows finance cost centres against relevant performance. And what I do when I'm producing that appendix, I liaise with managers to get adequate commentary to inform the panel of any performance issues. However, you as panel members can invite relevant managers to attend, and you would do that via the chair in the interim period between the report being issued and the date of the meeting, which is normally 2 weeks. The second piece of information is the strategic risk register, which is reviewed quarterly, individually with management team and collectively as well, because risks are owned individually by directors or by management team as a group. Once that's done, I update the document and that goes before this panel. The third piece of information is the Strategic Performance Report Executive Summary, which goes to management team on a monthly basis and cabinet on a quarterly basis. That comprises of 19 key performance measures under 4 categories, which are finance, people and service delivery, processes, and improvement. The fourth piece of information has been added over time, and that relates to an inspection report that highlighted it would be good practice to keep elected members informed of any activity or inactivity relating to covert surveillance, and that is noted in the initial narrative of the report. The fifth and sixth pieces of information are Appendix D and E. Appendix D relates to freedom of information requests and environmental information requests outside their designated timescale, which is 20 days. Similarly, the last piece of information in Appendix E relates to complaints outside their response timescale, which is 10 days. So specifically moving to the second quarter, the summary for risk and performance is as follows. Appendix A shows that 2 have improved, 2 of the measures have improved, 1 declined, 2 stayed the same, and 2 have no trend. The declined performance measure relates to the removal of private sector housing hazards, which is 7 against 9 at the same time last year, and the target is 60. The manager provided information relating to some problems with staffing issues. In relation to the strategic risk register, which is Appendix B, the position at the end of the second quarter is net red 3, net amber 5, and net green 11. So therefore 16 of the risk, or 84%, are deemed satisfactorily managed. The key updates this quarter were that 1 risk, R19, which was the disruption of ensuing from the Brexit process, that was deleted and replaced by R24, which is effects of the changed relationship with the EU. And a new risk has been added in relation to communications, which is R23. And finally, in terms of the Strategic Performance Report Executive Summary at Appendix C, that shows that 11 of the measures are green and 8 are red, and they're shown in the areas for improvement section of the report. Just quickly to say what they are: the general fund revenue, business rates collection, work days lost to short-term sickness absence, work days lost to long-term sickness absence, short-term sickness absence return to work interview compliance, agency staff spend, annual development reviews, and delivering our future monitoring.
Can I open this up for questions? Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Condacor.
It's always Councillor Condacor. On the report on page 94, it's got the details on the easy to let times to rent out property after it's been empty and then recycled. I find it really bizarre that we only measure the easy to let ones and not actually have a count of the ones that are difficult to let. I know, in particular with the by-election I went round Barpool, Barford Court has been demolished or being demolished to get rid of some of our difficult to let. But if we've got these two measures of general purpose and living in terms of days, we should actually have a number in the report saying, and there are 90 or 200 or 12 not included in this because they're difficult to let. I know when I was first a councillor, the longest unlet bedsit was unlet for 10 years. So I do think these stats are really good to measure the performance of the ones we are dealing with, but can we ask to actually have, I know it can't be a date because some of them never get let, but a number for the number of difficult to lets, because then we can see the council improving that stat. And then, if I may, while I've got the mic, on the risk register, it was talking about the Brit exit supply issue risk, and I know we've got issues with ink at the moment. Is the management team aware of what other issues we've got that we need to get supplies in yet? Because obviously it can be something really trivial, but actually it can cause chaos in organisation. So is that risk being escalated as things are getting difficult to supply? And is the management team sort of horizon scanning of things that are not available? Thank you, Chair.
In terms of the difficult to lets, if I could note that, I can get that information for you. In relation to your question about Brexit, yes, I understand that the next review for the Strategic Risk Register is due in December, possibly delayed to early January. That is sort of been accounted for in terms of they are aware of certain things that it will need to be updated. There'll be more information coming on board for putting that into the register. But specifically, I can't answer what they are.
Councillor Conical?
Yeah, Chair, can I just ask that rather than just email with a number of difficult to let, it's added to the performance report if members agree? 'Cause I think it is useful to keep an eye on that number and see it gradually get reduced as we take action. Thank you.
Would members of the committee like to see that moving forward? Can we have that moving forward? Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Steve. I think it's appreciated the fact you've talked us how the report works. I think for newer members, I think that's really helpful. In terms of the monitoring report, on page 93, and I've raised this at the last two committees now, the 64,000 underspending grounds maintenance. I've been told since I've raised it that it's informed by the officer that it's been wrongly categorised. Now, if we've got an underspend, I'd like to know whether it is 64. It's in the housing account. So if it has been wrong categorised, it's either an underspend in grounds maintenance or it belongs somewhere else. So if I could have clarification as to where it belongs, for 64,000 when we're facing a deficit, we are as rather a lot. In terms of salary savings, I have asked what the vacancy rate is. I'm still waiting for an answer, so if you could chase that for me as well. I appreciate that actually there should be an officer at the side of yourself, Chair, who can answer the questions, and I think it's a little unfair for Steve to be put in the position he is.
We can get those questions noted and answered for you, Councillor Shepherd. Does anybody else have any questions? Are we happy to note the contents of this report? We shall go back to item number 8, which is the Community and Voluntary Sector Performance Report. Does anybody have any questions relating to that report that we would like to get answers for? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, these are organisations that we give funding to, who I would have expected to be in the room to answer any questions we've got. So could I ask, it might have been that the time and the date wasn't convenient for them, so could I ask that this report is deferred for us to get a date when they can both attend? Because I think it's quite important.
Councillor Conical.
I was just going to second that.
Everybody in agreement that we defer this report to a later date?
Yeah.
Again, are we happy to note the contents of that report, then moving it forward to a later date? Item number 11, the forward plan. Does anybody have any comments on the forward plan? Councillor Condacall.
Sorry, is this our work plan? I'm having trouble now. It's not on paper.
Item 11, the forward plan, not our work plan. That's noted, item 11. So moving forward then, item number 12, the work programme, and I believe Councillor Condacall wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have difficulty not doing paper. I will learn. Yeah, I sent a work request form in for the item on trees. Obviously, it's not in a rush because obviously the council's still developing its tree strategy, but I would like the Scrutiny Committee to discuss it, and particularly on my work programme form, I mentioned developers planting trees that are not suitable. One of my colleagues mentioned the developer behind us is planting lots of ash trees, and we're ash dieback at the moment. So I do think we need to sort of have the tree officers and have a good discussion on what we're planting forward, so we're not just counting trees. And the second thing I wanted to mention is the sewage being pumped into the River Anchor has become quite an issue. And I don't know if that should be something going to this OSP in future or the planning and whatever it's OSP. But I do think we need to make sure our sewage network is up to scratch, which with 1,000 hours of pumping into the Anchor last year, it clearly isn't at the moment. So I don't know if you and the chair of the Planning and Environment OSC could discuss if we could put that on one or other of the OSPs. Thank you.
Yeah, I got the work form suggestion earlier, so we can have a look at that and bring that forward to the next meeting to have a look at when we can slot it into the programme. And if you want to stick the other item down in a work programme form again as what you'd specifically like to discuss, and then I can get together and we can decide which committee it would go to. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Shepherd.
Apologise, and it's me again. In terms of the allotment strategy, some time ago we moved the allotments into their own ownership, and I was part of that. It would be good to have them back to see how they're managing.
If that's the end of item number 12, we shall move forward to any other items. Does anybody have anything they wish to add in any other business? Therefore, we shall bring this committee meeting to a close. Thank you to everybody who attended this evening.